This rules and reference hearing to order. Tonight, we will discuss legislation that would codify the composition of the Civilian Police Review Board and Department of the Inspector General for the Division of Police. The Community Safety Advisory Commission met for more than a year. They crafted recommendations for ways to improve the Columbus Division of Police and improve trust within the community. One of their most important recommendations was to create a civilian review board. Following through on this recommendation, Council proposed to establish the board in the city's constitution. This required advancing the board before voters last November. Around 3/4 or 74% of Columbus residents voted yes to create a civilian review board and an office of Inspector General. Council and the mayor have since appointed 11 members to this board. The ordinance we're discussing tonight will codify the composition of the board and help spell out certain responsibilities and powers of the board and the Inspector General. While we'll be getting into the weeds this evening, I think it's important to acknowledge why we're here and why our city is creating a civilian police review board. First, is to improve accountability and transparency when it comes to potential law enforcement misconduct. Second, it's to establish an independence and oversight agency in terms of the Inspector General with the Columbus Police Department. And third, so that we can continue improving. The board alone isn't going to solve the issues that we face in Columbus, but this is a good step in the right direction. And this group can help guide how the city of Columbus continues to improve community relations and ultimately help more folks feel safe in our city. I want to thank especially our chair, Janet Jackson, and all the members of the board for agreeing to serve in such an important capacity. Certainly want to thank Deputy Chief of Staff, Kate Pashadi from the Mayor's Office, and Chief Counsel, Laura Baker Morris from City Attorney Klein's office for their collaboration and getting us to where we are today. And then last and certainly not least, I would want to thank Councilmember Dorans and his team for help crafting this review board and this ordinance and helping us get here today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Dorans.
Thank you, Council President Hardin. Before we begin tonight, I just want to thank everyone for their work in preparing for today's hearing. Certainly Council President Hardin, Chief Counsel in the City Attorney's Office, Laura Baker Morris, Mayor Ginther's Deputy Chief of Staff, Kate Pashadi, the Chair of the Civilian Review Board, Janet Jackson, who's stepped forward yet again to serve the residents and citizens of Columbus. Appreciate them all being here tonight and preparing for this hearing. So they also want to thank City Clerk staff, namely Angie Burke, Mark Carter, and the team at CTV for broadcasting this event, including Evan Smith and Andy Stout. This hearing is the first in-person public meeting in council chambers since March of 2020. So welcome back those that are here in person. This is a hybrid hearing, so some folks are joining us virtually, others are here in council chambers. So this is a new process and we're all trying to navigate it together. So hopefully we'll have some of that Midwestern politeness if things go off the rails with any technology tonight. And if so, I will ask for folks' patience as we get ourselves back on course. Want to thank the members of the public that are joining us here virtually tonight to learn about the ordinance number 1169-2021 to codify the composition of the Civilian Review Board and Department of Inspector General for the Division of Police, to supplement the city charter by conferring expanded authority to the board and Department of Inspector General to exercise certain duties and responsibilities, including the authority to develop administrative rules, receive, initiate, review, and cause the investigation of complaints of misconduct, make recommendations on resolutions of complaints, make recommendations on discipline and specific circumstances, to subpoena witnesses and evidence, and to declare an emergency for this legislation. I've heard from some of the community over the past several weeks that are a bit confused about this legislation after Council President Hardin had mentioned the vote this last November to the creation of the Civilian Review Board via city charter. That city charter amendment amended our city's charter, our constitution. It set in place a framework and a foundation for a Civilian Review Board. I believed, council believed, the mayor's office believed it was incredibly important to have the Civilian Review Board enshrined in our city's constitution. However, not all details were spelled out in that charter amendment. That is why we're here tonight. That is the subject of ordinance number 1169-2021. We're going to learn more about this legislation here tonight from the various speakers. The last thank you I want to say on the front end is to all the members of the community, community leaders, faith leaders, many of those who have been advocating for a civilian review board for decades. We would not be here tonight without their advocacy, and I appreciate their long struggle in getting us here to this point. This hearing is being streamed live on the city's Facebook and YouTube pages and being conducted, as I said, in person and via WebEx. The video will be posted on the City of Columbus YouTube channel following this event. At this point, I'd like to kick the hearing off by turning the floor over to the Mayor's Deputy Chief of Staff, Kate Pisciotti, for any remarks. Kate, the virtual and physical floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans. Council President Hardin, thank you so much on behalf of Mayor Ginther for allowing us to take part in this evening's hearing to talk about the ordinance for Columbus's first ever civilian review board. In November of 2017, Mayor Ginther announced the creation of the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission. Two of our members, which are here right now, Janet Jackson, who was a chair, as well as Dr. Chanel Jones. The commission was focused on areas such as de-escalation, crisis intervention, implicit bias training, use of force policies, and other important aspects of policing. In each area, the commission assessed what the City of Columbus needed to do to provide public safety services that are transparent, accountable, and responsive for every person in every neighborhood. In January of 2020, the commission presented a report with 80 recommendations. Recommendation number 70 was the establishment of an independent civilian review board. In July of 2020, Mayor Ginther seated the Civilian Review Board work group to structure the Civilian Review Board. To that point, Columbus was the only major metropolitan area without any kind of civilian oversight of law enforcement. This absence of oversight has continued to erode the trust between community and police. The work group studied best practices and used in other cities and brought back the right civilian review board recommendations for Columbus. The group helped guide important decisions, including how the board was to be seated, how it will operate, and what powers will be afforded to the board. Some of the recommendations included board appointments by Mayor Ginther in consultation with Columbus City Council, board receiving ongoing training in police tactics, constitutional law, de-escalation, implicit bias, and other important subject matters. The board should be given broad investigative powers, including subpoena powers. The board will set minimum qualifications for the new Inspector General. In November of 2020, Columbus voters overwhelmingly approved the amendment to the city charter to establish the Civilian Review Board. And in December of 2020, the application process was open to the community and closed on January 15th. The city reviewed and received and reviewed over 200 applications and conducted 22 interviews along with some of our community partners. In April of 2021, Mayor Ginther appointed and Columbus City Council concurred with the inaugural members of the Columbus Civilian Review Board. At the same time, Mayor Ginther appointed the Honorable Janet Jackson to be the chairperson of this board. We feel that we could not be in better hands. Tonight before you is the ordinance that will provide the board with the authority to develop administrative rules, receive, initiate, review, and investigate complaints and misconduct, and make recommendations on resolutions of complaints. One last thing, we'd be remiss not to give a special thanks to Laura Baker-Morrish, who's been on this ride since the very beginning. So thank you for all your help. Thank you very much, Councilmember.
Thank you, Deputy Chief of Staff. I also wanted to pause and acknowledge one of my council colleagues, Emmanuel Remy, who's joined us here this evening. Councilmember Remy, thanks for being with us here tonight. Next, I'd like to turn the virtual and physical floor over to Chair Janet Jackson of the Columbus Civilian Review Board. Chair Jackson.
Thank you to Council President Hardin and to Councilmember Dorans and other council members who may be in attendance. Good evening. My remarks will be brief, and really it's all about saying thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the 16 other members of the Safety Advisory Commission. We worked for over 18 months before we produced those 80 recommendations that we provided to the mayor in January of 2020. a lot of long, hard work. And that's the foundation as we move forward. I want to say thank you to the mayor and to council for lifting up the recommendations for the Civilian Review Board and the role of Inspector General, for placing it on the ballot. And then a huge thank you to the 74% of the voters who voted yes. I truly feel as we move forward that we are actually about to begin the work that the vast majority of the citizens of this community wants to see to be accomplished. I'll say thank you to the mayor for appointing me chair. Retirement seems to be a very difficult thing for me to achieve, but I'm looking forward to working with the 10 other members of the Civilian Review Board. And actually, a couple of them served on the advisory commission. So I'm really looking forward to that. I don't need to repeat all of the background. You've heard that from others. This ordinance, I believe, becomes effective July 22nd. So I would expect that the board will meet very early in August. And even though the charter only calls for 4 meetings a year, board members get ready because we're going to be meeting much more frequently than that to get ourselves prepared to do the heavy lifting of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Jackson, and also want to pause and recognize we have several of the Civilian Review Board members in addition to Chair Jackson here, both in council chambers and also joining us virtually. So thank you to those members of the board who are here tonight with us. At this point, I would like to turn the mic over to Chief Counsel of the City Attorney's Office, Laura Baker-Morrish, who has a presentation on the specifics of ordinance number 1169-2021. Ms. Baker-Morrish, I believe you have presentation powers at this point. Take it away.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. I want to thank you, Chair Dorans, Council President Hardin, Chair Jackson, who I'm happy to see again, and other council members who are watching here online. It's a very strange environment, so I hope to be able to go through the provisions of Ordinance 1169-2021 without losing myself in the virtual world here. So, yeah, a little bit of background that's already been shared by Deputy Chief of Staff Pashadi. This began with the Columbus Community Safety Advisory, January 2020, presenting final recommendations for police reform. These recommendations were informed by and consistent with an independent operational review conducted by the Division of Police, conducted for the Division of Police by Matrix Consulting. Among these recommendations, the Commission called for the establishment of an independent civilian review board and an amendment to the city charter to create a city-funded, operationally independent, professionally staffed, public-facing entity empowered to participate fully in investigations involving division personnel. In furtherance of the Advisory Commission's recommendations, in July of 2020, the city established and seated the Civilian Review Board Work Group to develop the board's roles and responsibilities. And this group then presented council and the mayor with recommendations in December of 2020. Ordinance 1169-2021 that we're going to speak about this evening is the culmination of these recommendations. As Chair Dorans has already expressed, the ordinance itself is described in its title as the codification of the composition of the Civilian Police Review Board and Department of the Inspector General. And we're going to go over some of the specific provisions of the ordinance tonight. Before we do so, I want to keep in mind the city charter that we've already discussed this evening. So, of course, citizens of the city of Columbus already passed the charter amendment back in November of 2020. Creating the Civilian Police Review Board, and the provisions in this particular slide discuss what that review board would consist of. But as was already alluded to by Chair Dorans, it did not provide specifics for operationability. It provided the fact that a Civilian Police Review Board would exist. It discussed generally what that board would be doing, but did not specify how the board would do its work or what the board would be composed of. So we come to new chapter 235. We're going to be amending Title II of the Columbus City Codes in order to enact a chapter specific to the Civilian Police Review Board and the Department of the Inspector General for the Division of Police. Starting with 235.01A, the Civilian Police Review Board membership terms. I'm not going to read all the specific provisions, but I'm going to talk about the highlights so we can talk about what this particular ordinance will do. First of all, it codifies the fact that the Civilian Police Review Board will consist of 11 citizen members who are appointed by the mayor with the approval of City Council. In addition to that appointment, it also codifies the fact that that board is to be representative of the diverse Columbus community as provided for in the charter amendment that we already discussed. In order to assure that, the council and the mayor. Sharon?
So we're going to pause very briefly. Chief Counsel Baker Morris had some trouble sharing her screen. He wanted to make sure that got up there. See, the hybrid environment is already rearing its ugly head at the moment. There we go.
Now you can see it.
We can. There it is. Apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're back on track. Yeah, now it looks different. So the board shall consist of 11 members appointed by the mayor with the approval of City Council. We're to be considering not only the required considerations that were part of the city charter, but also considering residency and or connection to the city of Columbus and relevant knowledge and or experience in a similar role. The members of the board shall serve without compensation for a term of 3 years, with the exception of the initial board. We wanted to make sure that board members were not all replaced every 3 years. So in order to do that, we had to start a process by which the terms would be staggered. So for that reason, the initial members of the board are going to serve either a 2 or a 3-year term, and that will allow those term positions to then be staggered in the years going forward. Members will be allowed to serve more than 1 term, but they may not serve more than 2 terms consecutively. So an individual could be appointed to the board, could be reappointed to the board, but at that point they would have to leave the board if they were to come back and serve another term. Members shall hold their seat until their successors are chosen, qualified, and installed. That just makes sure in the event that an individual decides to voluntarily leave the board, or if there's some, for whatever reason, they can no longer fulfill their term on the board, they would hold that particular position until their successor could be appointed. The mayor shall appoint one of the board members to serve as the chairperson, whose role it will be to preside over meetings of the board, and that, as already stated, is going to be Chair Jackson. Membership terms. Prior to being presented to City Council for approval, potential board members shall execute and signed release and submit to a full background check, including a criminal background check, as a condition of their appointment. This, however, for the initial board members have already been appointed, so those individuals will need to engage in that background check prior to beginning their work for the board. Membership terms. The initial board, in consultation with the city attorney, shall develop standards of professional conduct, policies pertaining to board membership, and a comprehensive training program for board appointees. So as you can see, we will continue to assist. Okay. All right. So the city attorney's office will continue to assist the board in making sure that those standards of professional conduct are developed as the board takes its seat and begins its duties. Upon appointment, but prior to beginning their duties, each newly appointed member of the board shall be required to complete a basic course of training, including instruction in police tactics, ride-alongs with patrol officers, seminars on relevant constitutional and criminal law, instruction in de-escalation techniques, and training in diversity, inclusion, and cultural competency and implicit bias. And so at this point, I want to kind of point out, you notice here that there's an insertion of diversity and cultural competency. The original ordinance that we were discussing here tonight was part of a collaborative effort coming out of the working group. And then as we brought it to council, additional suggestions and recommendations were made for amendments to the ordinance in order to offer some additional provisions. And one of those provisions in this case was the specific inclusion of diversity and cultural competency as part of the training program. Members of the initial board shall be required to attend and complete the comprehensive training program as well, but of course they have to make sure that's established first. So their goal will be to, if practicable, to participate and finish that within their first term, and if not, before they could be reappointed to the board, if they were to be reappointed, they would make sure that they had to complete the comprehensive training. All right, the membership terms. The board shall develop rules for recommending to the mayor the removal of one of its members for cause. Again, we have an amendment here. At the recommendation of the board, the mayor, with the concurrence of council, may remove any member so appointed for inefficiency, neglect of duty, including failure to attend meetings or complete mandatory training, malfeasance in office. This is not uncommon for members of boards and commissions within the city of Columbus, and these provisions reflect provisions that all such members are required to exude and to live up to. All such removals shall be final, but that an individual will have the opportunity to be heard before the city council if they have any defenses to why they should not be removed. Within 60 days after the effective date of the ordinance, the board shall meet and organize under the leadership of the appointed chairperson and elect a vice chair. Vice chair will be the individual who will have the opportunity to step in should the chairperson be unable to attend a meeting. Following the completion of the first term of the appointed chairperson of the board shall then annually elect from its membership a chairperson who shall preside over its meetings and a vice chair who shall serve in the absence of the chair. Again, this is not uncommon for boards and commissions within the city of Columbus. The board will adopt bylaws to govern its conduct. It will have provisions for regular or special meetings, voting procedures, amendments of its bylaws, and anything else that the board deems necessary to conduct its business. Where the bylaws are silent, again, as is usual, questions of parliamentary procedure shall be governed by Robert's Rules of Order. As was alluded to earlier by Chair Dorans, the board will have the authority to promulgate rules and regulations in accordance with Section 12105 of the Columbus City Codes in order to carry out its duties. Some examples of rules and regulations that the board might want to consider are what would be the operating procedure for a hearing if the board were to conduct a hearing. What would be the provisions under which a board or the board could request that a subpoena issue? Things along those lines that involve matters of process about how the board conducts its work are things that could be the subject of rules or regulations should the board choose. The board and the Inspector General then shall develop the procedures necessary for the board to carry out its duties, and again, including the procedures to convene hearings, to review investigations, and to coordinate with the Division of Police and any other operating procedures. The board shall meet at such times as may be necessary to carry out its business, provided it has one meeting shall be conducted each quarter in a calendar year. All meetings shall be public meetings. And this means that this board, like many other boards within the city of Columbus, will have notice requirements, so the public knows when the board will be meeting. They will be open to the public, so the public can participate and review and observe meetings of the board, and they will be required to maintain minutes so that the public will be aware of what was discussed at various board meetings. So that's about the composition of the board. Then we move on to what the board will be doing. Once again, under the city charter enacted by citizens of the city of Columbus, it laid out the general precepts of what the Civilian Police Review Board does. What the ordinance does is it takes those general concepts and principles, it codifies them and creates some process by which, and specifies the process by which those specific duties are going to actually be. Duties of the Civilian Police Review Board shall be as follows: to receive, initiate, review, and if appropriate, to direct the Inspector General to investigate and prepare a report for review, complaints alleging misconduct and or excessive use of force by sworn personnel of the Columbus Division of Police. 2, direct the Inspector General to review and provide a report for review, investigations conducted by the Columbus Division of Police Internal Affairs Bureau for fairness and accuracy, and if warranted, to recommend changes to division policies and procedures based upon said reviews. What this basically does is contemplate that there might be circumstances where the Inspector General is investigating a particular allegation, and there might be circumstances under which the Division of Police Internal Affairs Bureau investigates a specific complaint or allegation. The differentiation between those two and how they're going to be differentiated is part of the things that the Civilian Police Review Board, working alongside the Inspector General, will determine and then promulgate via rules. 3, to make recommendations on resolutions of complaints, if warranted, to the Chief of Police and/or the Director of Public Safety regarding matters reviewed by the board. 4, make recommendations on discipline, if warranted, to the Chief of Police and/or the Director of Public Safety regarding the outcome of all investigations reviewed by the board. Once again, in this particular case, these are recommendations on discipline and recommendations on dispositions at this particular point in time. Should the collective bargaining agreement, the Fraternal Order of Police, be amended at some point in the future, then there may well be a possibility, if amended in that way, for making something more than just a recommendation. But at this point in time, these are recommendations. 5, to evaluate and identify complaint patterns and make recommendations to reduce complaints based upon said evaluation. 6, to review and make recommendations regarding Division of Police policies and procedures. These two kind of go hand in hand. Having basically an oversight here over the kinds of complaints that are lodged and the allegations that are made, and then able to turn around and, after having made those recommendations to reduce complaints, to review and make recommendations regarding policies and procedures of the police in order to implement those changes. 7, perform such other duties not inconsistent with the provisions of this charter, this chapter, or as may be required of the board by ordinance. That again allows for, after some review has occurred, after investigations have been completed, are there other things that the Civilian Police Review Board ought to be doing in order to further its and carry out its purposes and its duties? That would be able to happen through future ordinance of council. There's also a reporting component here. Civilian Police Review Board shall report annually to City Council on the disposition of complaints, the outcome of investigations reviewed by the board, as well as the board's actions and recommendations, which may include the division operations, discipline recommendations, trends and patterns, officer-involved shootings, and any issues pertaining to instances of racial profiling or bias. Again, this is so that the Civilian Police Review Board not only conducts those evaluations and reviews, but then reports on them to council, so there's an awareness of what impact the board is, what the nature of the complaints might be. So that's the Civilian Police Review Board codification. Next, we go back to the city charter to talk about the Department of the Inspector General for the Division of Police. City charter provision, as you can see here, is actually fairly broad. It provides a framework for creating the Department of the Inspector General, but doesn't really give the specifics. And hopefully the codification of the department gives a little bit more meat, and so we can understand what the Inspector General will be doing vis-a-vis the board. Department of the Inspector General the Inspector General shall serve as the director of the Department of the Inspector General for a 5-year term in the unclassified service. This is similar to the terms served by the Chief of Police. The Inspector General may be reappointed for not more than one additional term of 5 years. The Civilian Police Review Board, by a 2/3 vote of the full board and with the concurrence of the mayor, may at any time remove the Inspector General, again for inefficiency, neglect of duty, malfeasance in office. Same procedure that you would have for removing a board member will happen for the Inspector General. What's missing here, and I would just remind everybody, going back to the city charter, is that it is the Civilian Police Review Board that appoints the Inspector General in the first instance, and that's why the Civilian Police Review Board plays this role in the removal of an Inspector General. But that provision is actually in the city charter rather than the code. The Inspector General shall have professional experience in the investigation of allegations of misconduct, shall conduct the duties of the Inspector General in a fair and impartial manner. Prior to being presented to the mayor for confirmation, the candidate for the position shall execute a signed release, and once again, like the members of the review board, submit to a full background check, including a criminal background. Duties. You're going to notice that the duties of the office, or the department, the Inspector General, are very much interlaced with the duties of the Civilian Police Review Board, and that is intentional. Inspector General is the inspector arm of the board. The board receives information from the Inspector General. The Inspector General is able to carry out the day-to-day operations and duties of conducting the investigations and then reporting back to the board. So the duties shall be: 1, to receive all complaints of misconduct and/or excessive use of force by sworn personnel in the Columbus Division of Police filed by citizens or initiated by the Civilian Police Review Board for review in order to determine and forward to the appropriate investigatory entity. This again also contemplates the idea that Office of the Inspector General may receive all of these complaints, but it may well be determined by rule that some complaints are going to continue to be investigated by the Internal Affairs Bureau. This allows for that to occur. 2, if so directed by the Civilian Police Review Board to investigate complaints of misconduct and/or excessive use of force by sworn personnel in the Columbus Division of Police and to prepare reports documenting findings and recommendations for review by the Civilian Police Review Board. To review and provide a report to the board on investigations conducted by the Division of Police Internal Affairs Bureau for fairness and accuracy. And that's an oversight function that the Inspector General, who will be working with the Internal Affairs Bureau from time to time, will be able to then report back to the Civilian Police Review Board regarding those investigations conducted by IAB. 4, make recommendations on resolutions of complaints and, if warranted, suggested discipline on matters to the Civilian Review Board. Again, it's the Inspector General's office and their employees that will be conducting the investigations and reviewing the complaints. They will make recommendations to the Civilian Police Review Board. The Civilian Police Review Board will hear that and the results of their investigation, and then make recommendations on resolution of those complaints to the Chief of Police and/or the Director of Public Safety. 5, to review and make recommendations to the Civilian Police Review Board regarding Division of Police policies and procedures. 6, to perform such other duties not inconsistent with the provisions of this charter. Again, these last 2 are similar to the last ones for the Civilian Police Review Board. It contemplates a back and forth conversation or dialogue amongst the Civilian Police Review Board, the Office of the Inspector General, regarding the Division of Police policies and procedures, and then ultimately back to Council and the administration for recommendations. You'll notice as I was presenting the various provisions of the ordinance that there were points in time where I recognized and acknowledged that there were provisions that were added by Council. Again, that's been part of an ongoing collaborative effort amongst the Council, the administration, the chair, and the City Attorney's Office. Timeline, I think we've already discussed. That is an overview of the ordinances that are before Council today.
Thank you, Chief Counsel. I wanted to pause for questions from my colleagues. Council President Hardin, still on the line with us?
I am. No questions right now, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Remy.
No, just appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. Just a couple clarifying questions, I think, for just the public's indulgence that may be tuning in. So, Chief Counsel, on 235.03B, so the reporting to Council, just so that, you know, we're saying this out loud for folks that may be interested in, that are viewing tonight, that is a public report that any member of the public, even though it's being addressed to Council, the annual report of the Civilian Review Board would be accessible to any member of any member of the public, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. And then going back to 235.03 and specifically looking at subsection 5 and 6, so it talks about looking at sort of pattern and practice and sort of policies as well. I think this is something fairly unique that is within this legislation. That is, I think historically, going back to some of the work that the Community Safety Advisory Commission had done in the past, this would be sort of prospective in nature, in which the Civilian Review Board would continue to be able to have the opportunity to evaluate, practices of the Columbus Division of Police and how that affects members of the public, correct?
Yes, that is correct. It's contemplated that because the Civilian Police Review Board will be in a very unique position of being able to have an overview of all different complaints that are coming into the Division of Police, they are well situated to make comments then regarding patterns that they are observing in receiving that information, but also make recommendations for policy changes as a result of what they are seeing.
Thank you. I mean, this really isn't a question, just more of a statement. I sort of view that as sort of a continuation of what the Safety Advisory Commission, so rather than, sort of every now and again putting a group of citizens together to take a look at these things, this is sort of a permanent body that is in a, as you put it, unique position to know exactly what the policies and practices are of the Division of Police, but also to have engagement with the community as far as like what their expectations are. So I think that's just a very unique element to the legislation. I think is helpful for us to sort of highlight as the review board begins its operations here sooner than later. Do want to pause if my colleagues have any other questions or comments before we sort of move to closing remarks. Hearing none, I would certainly like to offer the opportunity to Chair Jackson to share any closing remarks she might have with us this evening. Chair Jackson?
Councilmember Dorans, I think I would just to close by speaking on behalf of the other 10 members of the Civilian Review Board to express our appreciation for being appointed to the board. I am sure that we are all looking forward to beginning our work. And I would just say thank you. Stay tuned. Let's get ready to work, board members.
Well, thank you, Chair Jackson, for that. And certainly thank you to all the members of the review board who've stepped forward to serve the community, many of which have served on the Safety Advisory Commission in the past, many of which have served as area commissioners and civic leaders all across Columbus. And I think are in a unique position to really be the voice and eyes and ears of members of the public as they really dive into some of these very, very difficult issues that our community is reckoning with. We did not receive any public speaker slips this evening, so I just want to thank everyone who joined us here tonight, certainly members of the public, everyone who's here in council chambers and virtually. As we've discussed, this legislation will put the Civilian Review Board in position to begin its important work. I'm hopeful that the CRB will create the trust and transparency that Council President Hardin mentioned at the beginning. This is vitally needed for our community and law enforcement to come together. This could not be more important as we deal with the rising violence in many of our neighborhoods, and community trust in law enforcement is key towards creating a safer Columbus for everyone. Certainly want to thank again Council President Hardin, Laura Baker Morris from the City Attorney's Office, Kate Pashotti from the Mayor's Office, certainly Janet Jackson, the chair of the Civilian Review Board. Thank you all for being here tonight and presenting. Appreciate all the work from Council's legal analyst, Nia Walters, Senior Legislative Advisor, John Oswald, my legislative aide, Kev McCain, and our intern, Ryan Redding. Again, the council staff and CTV who worked to make tonight's hearing possible. I want to encourage members of the public looking for more information on this legislation and Civilian Review Board in general to contact my office. Generally, the easiest way to get a hold of me is radorans@columbus.gov. As set, ordinance number 1169-2021 was on council agenda for first reading last Monday, June 28th, and will appear as emergency legislation with the amendments that we've discussed tonight at the next council meeting on Monday, July 12th at 5 p.m. And with that, I would certainly like to turn the mic back over to the chair of the Rules and Reference Committee, Council President Hardin. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the work of everyone on the commission, to the folks to the commission members, the advisory board members who are review members who have joined us. Thank you so much. But also thank you for your commitment. This work is hard. It's heavy. You've put a lot on your shoulders. The city has asked a lot of you, and we will be there. We will make sure you have the support to do your job, to hire the inspector general, and to get to work. We look forward to working with you and being a good partner as we do this important business, making sure there's accountability and oversight so that we can get to that key thing, which is a continued trust in our great law enforcement officers. So again, just thank you all. And with that, we will conclude this hearing.